Let's get it on then, shall we? Mwah. Welcome to Sex on the Peach, your weekly hump day dose of everyone's favourite untalked about topic, sex. Let's get honest, let's get open, let's get comfortable, and let's get in to this week's show. Friends, lovers, listeners, happy Wednesday, happy hump day, and happy Sex on the Peach day, coming to you directly from Toronto, Canada, where I have relocated to for a little while whilst I rehearse for a new project. Sex on the Peach Worldwide is at it again. We've gone global again, babies. Now, for anyone who has been listening to Sex on the Peach for a while, the title of this episode is going to seem as rage baity as HSTikkyTokky. Now, if you don't know who that is, go ahead and watch Theroux's Inside the Manosphere, even just so you can see a misogynistic, supposed alpha male of high value say, "Mummy, I don't want a juice bar." And the high value in that sentence is in as heavy quotation marks as the good is in the title of this episode. We all know by now that I believe language carries a lot of power, and that sex cannot be reduced to binary language such as good and bad. We are all so extremely different, so how can we even begin to categorize people in that way? And as I've said many times before, if I talk about a sexual experience, I always try to lean into the language of how it felt personally for me, whether it felt connected, whether it felt collaborative or even compatible, rather than label someone as simply good or bad. I mean, I'm in the musical theatre industry, which is almost as incestuous as the royal family. So I've had sexual experiences with people that some of my friends also have. And sometimes we've received those sexual experiences completely differently. And that's because we're all so different. It's pretty impossible to be a master of every single physical sexual body because we also all have our own preferences. If you are extremely vanilla leaning, that might seem boring to someone who relies on kink or fetish to have a good time sexually. But equally, if you are very into kink, that can feel overwhelming or uncomfortable to someone who just wants something simple. If you love slow, drawn out, really connected sex, that might feel too intense for someone who prefers things to be a bit more light and playful and spontaneous. If you are quite dominant in your energy, that might feel exciting to one person who likes to be submissive, but also slightly intimidating or off-putting to someone who doesn't want that dynamic. This is why good and bad don't really hold up, because the exact same behavior, the exact same energy can be received as incredible by one sexual partner and completely not right by another. And I actually believe both of those words can be really problematic when it comes to this, because obviously labeling someone bad in bed is incredibly shame-inducing and very destructive to sexual confidence. But also, if someone is labeled good in bed, as flattering as that might be, it can lead to the attitude that because what we did worked for one person, that it will work for everyone. And that simply isn't the case. And we don't want to be complacent lovers now, do we? But
how to be good in bed still remains one of the most frequently asked questions in the sexual space. And with all I've already said in mind, there are some things that I think can contribute to being as close to a good lover as we are going to get. And just to say, as always, everything I'm talking about here today sits firmly on a foundation of clear, ongoing consent. I'm not going to repeat that every 5 minutes in this episode, but let's take it as a given. So, 5 seasons in, we're going back to basics. Let's get into this week's how-to episode. Here is how to be good in bed. So, let's start gently dismantling this question. Good and bad are incredibly blunt ways to describe something as nuanced, personal, and relational as sex. Those two words carry a lot of weight because they imply there's a standard or a benchmark. We're basically saying there's a way you are supposed to be in the bedroom that can be measured or judged. And the problem is most of us absorb that idea without even realizing it. So when we inevitably at some point in our lives ask either ourselves or a partner, am I good in bed? What we're usually really asking is something much more vulnerable. We're asking, am I desirable? Do people actually enjoy being with me sexually? Am I sexually enough? And those are real, important, and very human questions. But good isn't actually a useful framework for answering them because it turns something that is inherently shared into something that feels like an individual test. It makes it seem like you either pass or fail, independent of the other person or of context or the dynamic, the chemistry, the mood, whether Mercury is in fucking retrograde. Like all of that just doesn't factor in. And that's simply not how it works because, again, what feels amazing to one person might feel uncomfortable, boring, or overwhelming to someone else. And that's not because one person is better or worse, but because compatibility, communication, and context are what often shape our experiences. So if you are trying to become universally good in bed, you are chasing something that doesn't actually exist. You're trying to meet an invisible standard that constantly shifts because sex trends are relentlessly changing. And that's very exhausting for all of us. It also pulls you out of the moment because instead of actually being present, you're just evaluating yourself in real time, thinking, am I doing this right? Should I be doing more? Do I look weird right now? You know, all of that stuff ruminates in our heads, which is incredibly normal and common, but it is also the least sexy internal monologue imaginable because it pulls you out of your experience and into this weird third-person perspective where you are watching yourself instead of being yourself. So instead of trying to become good in bed, what we are actually aiming for is to become someone who can co-create a connected and responsive sexual experience with another person. which means it's collaborative, it's mutual. And that immediately removes the idea that it's all on you. It's not your job to single-handedly make something amazing happen. And when you move from I need to be good at this to I need to be present in this, you stop performing and you start collaborating, because you are no longer trying to prove something about yourself or impress someone. You're not trying to demonstrate that you are good enough. You're just trying to connect and engage and build something with the person or people in front of you. And ironically, if we are going to look at this through the lens of binary language, that's what actually makes someone good to be in bed with. It's not some sacred technique or some secret set of moves. It's the ability to be present, attentive, and responsive, and not treating the whole thing like an audition. Because trust me, as an actor, the last thing I want is to feel like my sex life is also an audition or performance. But in saying that, anyone listening who is also an actor will probably, surely agree that any audition or rehearsal room that feels collaborative is much more fun and enjoyable than when an environment is purely performative. Because pressure and pleasure are not besties. They certainly are not ride or dies. They sit at separate lunch tables. So if you take that pressure off, if you stop trying to be good in this very fixed, performative way, you actually create the conditions for something much better. And this is where we can get a bit more practical, because even though good isn't a fixed thing, there are ways to be a better partner in that collaboration. There are things that consistently make sex feel more connected, more enjoyable, and less like you are both or all just guessing your way through it. And I'm certainly not going to be giving you a list of do this, don't do that rules, because even that is very performance energy. And I'm not here to just tell you what to do. I'm just going to walk you through a few things that I think can make a difference if they are something you feel like you want to incorporate into your sexual practice. Not because they'll make you universally good in bed, but because they can make you feel more present and more aware. And the first one, which will probably come as no surprise to anyone, because we know I promote masturbation like it's going out of fashion faster than low-rise jeans, is getting to know yourself first. Because you can't expect a guided tour if you haven't even been in the building. Now, I know that the majority of my listener base are not virgins. And so you may be thinking, oh, well, I didn't get to know myself first, and now I've been having sex for 20 years already. Or I skipped that step and just hoped for the best. Well, I've got some news for you. It's never too late. This is not a limited time offer. And some of you are truly out here crowdsourcing information that you could have gathered yourself. You wouldn't expect someone to assemble an IKEA flat pack without instructions. So why are you doing that with your own body? Yes, we've established that sex is a collaboration, but you still need to know what you are actually bringing into it. And what I mean by that is a lot of people haven't actually spent time understanding their own relationship with their own body, their desires, their boundaries, what brings them pleasure, or even just what makes them feel comfortable in the first place. And given that masturbation is literally the most direct way to understand your own body, people often rush through it, feel awkward about it, treat it like it doesn't really count in the same way sex with someone else does, or they just don't do it at all. But it's kind of the starting point. Masturbation is where you learn without pressure, without anyone watching, without any need to perform, what actually feels good for you. It's where you notice what your body responds to, what kind of touch works for you, where on your body your strongest erogenous zones are. And because there's no audience, there's no performance. You're not trying to look a certain way or sound a certain way or react in a way you think is expected or wanted. It's just you paying attention to your own experience. It's research, it's information, and that is so incredibly valuable as a sexual partner. Because without that awareness, you go into sex with another person essentially guessing. Or worse, you rely entirely on them to figure you out, which is a lot of pressure to put on someone else, especially when you don't have the language or the awareness to guide them. If you don't know what feels good for you, it's very hard to recognize when something is working, and just as hard to communicate when something isn't. So instead, you might stay quiet and go along with things that you feel unsure about, or default to reactions that you think are expected rather than what you're actually feeling. And that's where and why things can start to feel disconnected. Masturbation also teaches you how to be in your body without rushing through the experience. And a lot of people treat it as something quick and functional, which, yes, is completely fine sometimes. I would be a hypocrite to say otherwise, considering half the time I'm giving 20 seconds to orgasm with my clitoral suction toys. But if that's the only way you engage with your body, you are missing the opportunity to understand things like what actually turns you on, what feels genuinely good, what feels forced, what your body responds to, what it needs more of, and what just doesn't land for you at all. And those are exactly the things that make partnered sex better. Because being good in bed isn't about doing more. It's about noticing more. So this doesn't mean you need to turn masturbation into some elaborate ritual. You know, it doesn't need to be a 5-step commitment like a nighttime skincare routine, but it does mean occasionally approaching it with a bit more curiosity. Slowing down, paying attention, and asking yourself what actually feels good along the way rather than just aiming for a quick outcome. That awareness is what you then bring into partnered sex. Because without that awareness, what happens is you outsource the experience. You're expecting other people to guess their way around you. Or you might become solely focused on the other person, what they want, what they might be thinking, whether they are enjoying themselves, and you lose track of your own experience entirely. You might wait for them to lead everything and therefore go along with things you're not fully comfortable with. Or you focus so much on pleasing them that you never check in with yourself. And while that can look like you're being attentive or easygoing, it actually often creates an imbalance because you're not participating fully, you're just adapting. It's basically the people pleasing of sex. And there's a difference between being responsive and being disconnected from your own experience. And people can feel that difference, even if they can't quite explain it. And knowing yourself doesn't mean you have everything figured out. It just means you have a baseline awareness of what helps you relax, what kind of pace you respond to, and what kind of connection you're actually looking for, which is really important for safety because it also means recognizing your limits. Respectfully, no one should be discovering your preferences before you do. Being good in bed doesn't mean saying yes to everything or being endlessly accommodating. It means knowing what's a genuine yes, what's a no, and what's a not like this or not right now. And that kind of clarity is really attractive in a sexual partner. So I implore you all, my wonderful, gorgeous friends, lovers, and listeners, to this week, find some time to spend with yourself and try to figure out something new about yourself sexually. That might be a new place you didn't know you liked to be touched, or learning a place you don't like to be touched. Get curious and find out some information about yourself, because when you know yourself, you don't have to perform confidence. You're not trying to come across a certain way or second guessing everything you're doing. You're just responding honestly to what's happening. And that's something that can make someone feel good to be with, because you can't really collaborate with someone if you don't know what you are contributing in the first place. If there's another thing that consistently separates people who are just experienced from people who are actually enjoyable to be with, it's attention. And I don't mean just looking at someone or technically being present in the room, because listen, a lot of people are physically there and mentally absolutely elsewhere. Our bodies can show up, but our brain is actually off doing a full weekly shop, reorganizing our lives, remembering something embarrassing from 200 years ago. We're actually just completely mentally unavailable. And it's very hard to have a shared experience with someone who is actually spiritually in a Tesco. So I mean actually noticing what's happening in real time. And this isn't in some weird over-analytical way. We aren't out here studying our sexual partners like a case study, but we need to be tuning in, friends. So I'm talking about the kind of attention where we are picking up on how their body is responding, whether they are leaning in or subtly pulling away, whether their breathing changes, whether something is clearly working or very much not. Because our partners are constantly giving us information. Constantly. The question is just whether you are actually picking up on it or whether you are too busy thinking about yourself. Straight musical theatre boys between the height of 5'10", 5'11", I'm looking at you. I love you. I'm obsessed with you. But all jokes aside, this is actually where a lot of people lose their way a bit sexually. Because real attention means getting out of your own head and getting out of your own ego and actually being there. And it's not about doing more. People always seem to think they need to add something, try a new thing, switch it up, escalate it. But most of the time, you don't. To be an attentive lover, you just need to notice what's already working and not abandon it too quickly. If someone is clearly responding well, that is not your cue to get creative. Men, penis owners, love you so much, but we do not need to learn your entire tongue repertoire. If we clearly like something you're doing, keep doing it, and then keep doing it some more, and then continue to keep doing it. But people do this all the time. They find something that's clearly landing and then immediately think, right, better move on to the next thing. And it's like, why? Stay there. That's the whole point. You don't get extra points for variety if the original thing was working perfectly well. You know, it's not a tasting menu. We don't need to sample everything you know. Commit to the plate. But equally, when something isn't working, being attentive lets you catch that early before it becomes awkward or before you both just politely push through it. Maybe someone's breathing has slowed down in a sexual way, not in a medical emergency kind of way. Maybe their moans have gotten a bit quieter, or maybe their moans have stopped altogether. Tap into that, because you can then adjust or check in and see what's up. And that kind of attentiveness and responsiveness is what makes people feel like the experience is actually for them, not just something that's happening to them while you run through a sequence of things you think you are supposed to do. Because there is a very specific feeling when someone is just doing things at you, and it's not great. Whereas when someone is paying attention and responding and actually staying with you in the moment, that feels collaborative. That feels intentional. And it feels like you are building something together. It's not just something you're both present for. And that's the difference. It's not just what you are doing, it's how aware you are while you're doing it. And the last thing, shock, shock, horror, horror, you're all going to be sick to the teeth of me talking about this, considering we are 62 episodes in. But the biggest thing that elevates people sexually is communication. Yes, I can hear the collective deep sigh. She's banging on about communication again, but it's true. There is the belief that talking about sex will somehow make things awkward forever. And that idea is so deeply ingrained, it's practically a cultural myth at this point. But you can have all the experience in the world. If you are not actually talking to the person in front of you, giving them space to tell you what they want, taking the time to talk about what feels good for you, you're basically just repeating the same experience with different people. And that's not being good. It is being consistent, but this isn't the gym. So communication isn't optional. It isn't secondary. It's actually the skill that everything else depends on. And sexual communication isn't just a few light check-ins in the moment. And it's definitely not a nice to have if things are already going well. It is the foundation for your sexual relationship. Now, to be clear, check-ins are important. Those in the moment, do you like this? Slower or faster? Stay there? All of that is communication and it matters. That is what keeps things responsive and connected in what's actually happening rather than what you think should be happening. But if that's the only level you are sexually communicating on, you are still missing a huge part of the picture. If you can't talk about sex, you are, whether you realize it or not, relying almost entirely on guesswork. And guesswork is a terrible strategy when it comes to something as personal, specific, and variable as pleasure. Because as we've already said a million times in this episode, What feels incredible to one person might do absolutely nothing for someone else. And without communication, there is no efficient way of bridging that gap. You're just hoping. And hope is not a skill set when it comes to sex. It might be a skill in the face of global disaster, but in the face of someone's genitals, not so much. And the reality is most people aren't avoiding communication because they don't care or because they are selfish. They are avoiding it because they don't actually know how to do it in a way that feels natural. No one teaches you how to talk about sex. You are expected to just pick it up somehow, somewhere along the line. And if you didn't grow up in an environment where that was normalized, it can feel overly serious, awkward, or like you're about to turn something fun into a really formal discussion. I mean, let's be real, it can feel absolutely fucking terrifying. So instead, people default to hints or vague body language or silence and hope the other person just gets it, which is how we all end up in those very common situations where something is almost working, not bad, not amazing, just hovering somewhere in the middle. And instead of saying, that's good, but a bit slower would be better for me, or stay exactly there, or actually that's not really doing much for me, people stay quiet and let it continue and essentially perform. And over time, that creates a pattern where sex becomes something you endure or manage or basically just quietly navigate rather than something you actively shape and enjoy. And it's, in my opinion, the reason that the majority of long-term relationships are not sexually active further on down the line because they haven't had these conversations early on. They haven't sorted out the sexual issues that presented themselves early on in the relationship. So a sexual experience wasn't built on as something to be enjoyed. Everyone just got on with it and didn't talk about it. But this is where communication can change everything because it turns sex from a guessing game into a collaborative process. It allows all people to actually actively participate. But to get there, you do have to get comfortable with being uncomfortable. And that might look like being able to say in a low pressure context, what do you actually enjoy? Or what do you tend to want more of? Or even, is there anything I'm doing that doesn't really do much for you? These conversations don't have to be super intense and intimidating. They can be casual, curious, even a bit playful. But they give you a level of insight that you simply cannot get through guessing in the moment. And also they can be fun because isn't it fun to learn more about our sexual partners and perhaps learn something new that we can try with them? And communication also looks like reflecting afterwards, which again, people avoid because they think it has to be a formal debrief. But it really doesn't. It can be as simple as, I really liked that, or that worked really well for me, which gives your partner clear, usable information without turning it into a critique or a review. We aren't having sex and then writing it up in the stage. And reinforcing what does work is just as important as addressing what doesn't. And that can be a really positive, productive way of maintaining that sexual communication, is really highlighting the things that do feel good for you. Because it is a sensitive topic. And during sex, communication becomes less about saying the perfect thing and more just about maintaining responsiveness. Small adjustments and check-ins and just bits of guidance. Stay there, slower, don't stop. Things like that. It doesn't have to be a monologue. It's not Shakespeare. It just has to exist. Because when it doesn't exist, people start filling in the gaps with their own assumptions. And those assumptions are often wrong. Someone might think they didn't say anything, so it must be fine. When in reality, the other person is thinking, I don't know how to say this, but this ain't quite right. Or someone might switch things up because they assume they should, when the other person was just about to say, that's fucking perfect, keep going. So these disconnects are so easy to come across and so common. But we are so afraid of hurting someone's feelings because there's so much ego attached to sex that we are willing to hurt our entire sex life and our entire sexual future with someone for the sake of not having a potentially difficult conversation. Which, yes, it probably will feel difficult if this kind of communication isn't a usual part of your sexual practice. But something that's also really important to understand when we talk about why these conversations are so difficult. Getting defensive about sexual feedback is completely fucking pointless because it's not personal. Every single physical body is different. If what feels incredible to one person does very little for someone else, that's not a reflection of your ability. So if someone tells you they prefer something slightly different or that something doesn't quite land for them, that's not them criticizing you as a sexual person. It's them giving you useful, specific information about their body. And if you can hear that without letting your ego get involved, you kind of instantly become a better lover because you are responding to reality instead of trying to defend an idea of whatever sexual version of yourself you've created in your own head. I mean, we all know by this point that I wish we could just get rid of all ego when it comes to the sexual space because everything would be so different. I know we're not there yet, but you just make things so much easier for yourself when you don't take them personally because they are not personal. And when this kind of communication is actually present, you remove a huge amount of uncertainty. You take away the pressure to get it right on instinct, and you replace it with clarity. And clarity is what allows people to relax. That's what creates safety. Because if we know that we can say, that's good, or that's not quite it, or can we try this instead, without the other person taking it personally or shutting down, we stop editing ourselves. We stop performing. We just respond. And that's when sex becomes genuinely good. Not because everything is always technically perfect, but because all people feel comfortable enough to be honest, present, and engaged with each other. So when I say communication is the most important skill to be a good lover, I mean it quite literally. Everything else, technique, confidence, experience, it all becomes more effective when communication is there and significantly less effective when it isn't. So if you feel like you want to, I have a little bit of homework because communication is one of those things that sounds great in theory and then people just don't do it. I talk about it and people say, yeah, oh my God, definitely. And then nothing changes. So at some point in the next week, if you want to, I want you to have an actual conversation about sex with the person or people you are sleeping with. An actual conversation. And before you panic, this does not need to be intense, formal, or deeply awkward. It just needs to be honest. It can be simple. What do you actually enjoy the most? Is there anything you want more of? Is there anything we do that you're feeling a bit meh about? And then consider how you respond. Because a lot of people say they want communication, but the moment they hear something that isn't glowing praise, they get defensive. But if someone says, I prefer it slower, that's not criticism. If someone says, this one thing doesn't really do much for me, that's not rejection. And if someone says, I'd love to do more of this instead, that is not you doing something wrong. It's information. That's it. And if you can receive that information without taking it personally, if you can stay open and curious and just say, okay, that's really helpful, everything improves. The sex gets better, the connection gets better, and you stop operating in that weird space of guessing and hoping. So that's the task. Have the conversation. Keep it simple. Stay curious. And when you are on the receiving end of feedback, don't make it about your ego. Make it about the sexual experience that you are building together. Because that, more than anything, is what makes someone genuinely good in bed. Without communication, you're guessing. And with communication, you're collaborating. Friends, lovers, listeners, if you take anything from this episode, let it be this. Being good in bed isn't about performing, impressing, or getting everything or anything technically right. It's about knowing yourself well enough to show up honestly and with information for your sexual partners. It's about paying enough attention to actually notice what's happening. And it's about communicating in a way that makes the whole experience feel collaborative instead of confusing. Those three things, self-awareness, attention, and communication, will take you so much further than any technique ever could, because they are what allow you to actually connect with the person in front of you rather than just doing things and hoping for the best. And also, this is a really important point. Have fun. Sex is supposed to feel good, not like a task you're trying to perfect. It's allowed to be playful, a bit awkward at times, funny, imperfect, silly. We all need to embrace more silliness, in my opinion. Sex is silly. We're literally putting our body parts in places and being like, yeah, cute, that feels good. So you are allowed to laugh if something goes wrong. You are allowed to not take yourself so seriously, and you are definitely allowed to enjoy it. So yes, take the communication seriously, take the awareness seriously, but don't forget that this is meant to be something you actually enjoy, not something you are trying to get a gold star in. Less performance, more participation. I will be back with you very soon with your next how-to episode. But for now, thanks for coming.
Thank you for tuning in to Sex on the Peach today, and I hope that you enjoyed this week's episode. You can find and follow me on Instagram, YouTube, and TikTok at Sex on the Peach Cast, and you can also get in touch with me at sexonthepeachcast@gmail.com. Please do continue to like, share, subscribe, rate, and review wherever you listen to your podcasts. and I'll see you next week. Love, Peach.